What would America look like if Donald Trump were reelected to a second term? My guest today, Joy Silver, has done a deep dive into the Blueprint for Authoritarianism Project 2025. And it is just that. It's the blueprint for what the radical right wants America to be, which involves it no longer being what it has been for centuries. In today's Snowstorm. So Joy Silver will be joining the show momentarily. She has burned the midnight oil and a lot of printer ink to help prepare for our conversation today. I'm very excited to say that Joy's going to be with me regularly as she is able between now and the November elections. My viewers, you have responded very powerfully to her, which is no surprise because I admire her greatly, and she certainly knows what she's doing, and she has the receipts to show for her decades of activism and change making. So, from Wikipedia, Project 2025, officially the Presidential Transition Project, is a collection of policy proposals to reshape the executive branch of the U.S. federal government at an unprecedented scale in the event of a Republican victory in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Established in 2022, the project seeks to recruit tens of thousands of conservatives to Washington, D.C. in order to replace existing federal civil service workers with Republicans characterized as part of the deep state to further the objectives of the next Republican president. Although the project cannot promote a specific presidential candidate, many contributors have close ties to Donald Trump and the Trump 2024 presidential campaign. The plan would perform a swift restructuring of the executive branch under a maximalist version of the unity executive theory, which is a dubious legal theory proposing the President of the United States has absolute power over the executive branch upon inauguration. Scared yet? My guest is a bit scared, and Joy Silver will be with us after this. PromoHomo.TV is all about empowering you, our communities, and our world. Shouting out to my media partners. Pink Media, amplifying PromoHomo.TV across the Twitterverse with their hashtag I Love Gay campaign. GayDesertGuide.lgbt and KGay 1065 Palm Springs, available worldwide. Ask your smart speaker to play KGAY. Here's the deal, folks. We have two distinct choices. We can prepare ourselves to live under authoritarian rule, or we can do everything in our power to save democracy. And saving democracy is the precise reason I have launched the Snowstorm, your quintessential LGBTQ plus Sunday show at 9 a.m. Pacific. Find it at PromoHomo.TV. Before I bring on Joy, I just want you to know if you're watching live and you have a question or comment for Joy or myself or about the subject matter, I can curate your comment onto the screen just like that. Unless you're watching on Instagram, I cannot do that with my Instagram viewers. But speaking of Instagram, I want to give a shout out to Warren, Ivan, Simon, and Matt who've tuned in over there. Also, you can promote this, you can help support this volunteer network for as little as $3 a month. When you do, you get this fabulous bumper sticker that's sent to you in a brown envelope like this from Patreon. I have 4 of these on my car. You shouldn't be surprised. And every little dollar helps promote this show. And finally, I don't want you to miss out on the show. The best way that you'll get notified of broadcast is to go to the YouTube channel. The address is listed below. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a subscribe button. But in addition to subscribing, you want to go into settings and make sure that your notifications are in fact turned on. So with that, let me welcome to the show my fantastic guest, Joy Silver. Good morning, Joy.
Good morning, Nicholas. Good morning.
The last time you were on was Easter Sunday, and we had Joy in the morning. And
You.
Passover is coming up, so happy Passover in advance. Is happy Passover something one would say, or is it a more somber holiday?
And no, I think it's definitely the celebration. It's the celebration of the Jewish people, or actually the Hebrews at that point, of leaving the country that had enslaved them. So it is a joyous, may I say that, all puns intended, to celebrate the moment of courage, of bravery, and also of triumphing over the challenges that were in front of us. And that is very propitious. Again, we seem to be celebrating holidays together, but all of them seem to be about hope and courage. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Well, everything you talked about is relevant to what we're facing in the United States under someone that wants to enslave us.
This is so true. And please bear in mind that although we're advertising a blueprint for authoritarianism, that is not certainly what they call their plan. They call it the mandate for leadership. And it does date back to the first one that they put out for Ronald Reagan. So that's kind of the history of the particular document that we're talking about today.
Before we dive into it, let's talk about the latest breaking headlines. So, the jury has been seated in the New York hush money trial, and we've had nonstop coverage of every moment of that across all news platforms, slanted on some, depending on which news network you watch. And also, I was watching State of the Union with Dana Bash on CNN today, and Governor Kristi Noem was the guest, and she was basically perpetuating all of the Trump lies. When directly asked about the abortion issue, she cited she also changed her stand. She used to advocate for a national abortion ban, and now she states that it does belong with the states. And when challenged about her own state not allowing abortion in the event of incest or rape, she said that it's up to the people. So, and she would not talk about whether or not she thought that Vice President at the time, Mike Pence, made the proper decision on January 6th. And, we have a whole slice of the American pie that don't that no longer supports facts and seems to live in this fictitious world, and that's kind of where we are this morning.
That's true. And just before we talk about the subject at hand, and it's all of a piece in any case. I think that these are the tools of installing a plan like Project 2025. So it's quite appropriate of what you're talking about in terms of the bifurcation or the disinformation. And we can look at that a little bit. What is the disinformation about? Undermining the credibility of news services is a tool in a takeover situation like that we are facing, or that is being planned for us. And it's interesting to me, one of the things that sticks out in my mind is how the focus on TikTok has become so, well, TikTok and its disinformation, and yet where is Fox News in this mix? And why isn't that looked at the way it is? Back when Nixon was the president, it is believed that it was Roger Ailes that suggested to Nixon, who was quite open to this, especially because of what happened to him in the debate with JFK, that there would be some sort of state-owned news network. And while that was considered impossible at that time, indeed, we have seen that that's really what Fox News serves as. It serves as that disinformation tool. And there's none so proficient at this as the Russians. And it is indeed part of the Russian plan, and this was uncovered, a document was uncovered in which the disinformation, and this is the KGB's methodology, it's called propaganda, okay, and this has been happening for a long time, but to use disinformation to disunify the United States and to undermine the credibility of its media services. And so this is because they want to eviscerate the United States leadership role in the world and just demolish the evil United States, which is how they see us. So the alignment with the MAGA Republicans, and I don't even want to call them Republicans, so we'll just call them MAGA, and their alignment with the Russian interests is also part of that technique. So when you're talking about the lies that are perpetrated on CNN, or the unwillingness to answer those questions, this is all part and parcel of installing something like this blueprint, this Project 2025.
Well, that sets us up for the answer to the question that's come in from a viewer who must have tuned in after the show started, because Yaki Dancer at Core Exercise asked, has anyone read the GOP's Project 2025 or where there is analysis? Well, you've tuned into the right show, because Joy is you want to hold it up? Joy, do you want to hold it up? Your document?
Well, I can show you one of the items, and this is a better version of the cover of it. I don't know if you can see that, but it's called The Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. And this is basically the operating manual for Project 2025. And I will say, I am beginning to go through the 700 pages, but I have to take it in tranches because of what it says is so intense. I'm busily underlining and writing notes in the side to understand. I mean, I think that Rachel Maddow really summed it up. It's basically rich people will have all the power, particularly if they're white, and everybody will be a Christian nationalist. I mean, that's kind of where it goes. There will be no more government and no more government protection for anyone who is not that. And it's basically about consolidating the power in the world to that 1%. Okay, that's like the overview. And my wife Atma said, why are you bothering reading that when that's really the point of the whole document? But I think what's important is to know how they're going to operate that. And so I am willing and I am committed to going through all 700 pages. So I'm going to say that I'm only in section 1 because it goes through every single department to talk about how that power is going to be consolidated and what steps have to be made. So yeah, that is what we're talking about today. And there's more to talk about.
So in section 1, I mean, before our show started, you were saying we are in trouble, and I sense some fear. And one of the things we talked about on Easter Sunday when you were on is I used the term saving democracy, and you prefer the term protect democracy. And certainly, whether or not you like one word or the other, we're in the phase where we need to do that, because if there is a second Trump term, that may not ever be possible again.
This is true. I mean, there's a few things I want to go back to in what you just said, Nicholas. One of them is scared or scared. So let's go back to scared. I think that for me, what's scary is not this document. What's scary to me is that people are unaware how organized the effort is. That's the scary piece. It's about, for want of a better term, our side who believe in democracy and want to see more inclusion in that process versus how organized they are.
I just want to stop you for a second, because our side includes Republicans, Independents, and Democrats who want to
That's
protect
correct.
democracy. This is not a Democratic or a Republican conversation. A Democrat, big D Democrat, or a Republican
Right.
conversation. This is a conversation. Uh, the sides are Americans who want democracy to continue, and the MAGA contingent that wants it to end so they can mandate their religious and political viewpoints on all of us.
So let's talk about the word democracy for a second. And I agree that many people want to protect or save democracy. However, and I make a however about this, there is in the document itself and throughout the philosophy of the conservative leadership, which is basically libertarianism, okay, to basically destroy government, period. Okay, so you either believe that government helps bring democracy and can support democracy, or you think democracy is destroyed by government. Okay, so they're very, very different in that way. If you go through the document itself, they will talk about protecting democracy. It's not like they're saying, now we're going to have a dictatorship, and that's written all over the document. I mean, when you see what they are purporting to do, you realize the consolidation of power makes it so. But from the perspective of the philosophy and in their sell point to conservative values, they're talking about saving democracy as well. And that they see that that the policies of the government and they don't talk about, well, I haven't gotten to the part where they talk about FDR, but they do talk about anything where government is protecting minority interests or other than their interest, it has to be undone, and that government cannot protect people, but people need to protect people. Okay, so they see that as democracy, but really what they're talking about is power flowing up to very few people. And what we're talking about is inclusion in the process of that decision making. And I think from that point of view, you're right in identifying that it's not a party scenario. It's if you think that voices should be heard, and that's what your idea of democracy is, then this is important to you because you're not going to have that option should this plan go forward.
So, I'm sure as you return to the show, we'll learn more about this, but you're in section one. What stands out? What's on your mind and heart that you want to discuss with the viewers today?
I want to let people know what the point of view is of the document, how far-reaching it is, how they plan to move forward, roll forward, and what it includes in terms of changing things from the way they are right now to the way they see them and they would like them to be.
Okay, let's start that process.
Okay, so let's start with the role of Christian nationalism. Okay, so Christian nationalism, it rejects the separation of church and state. And this religious freedom is referenced throughout the plan, and that becomes more important than any other civil rights, which has to do with other individuals' religious rights. There's already, and again, I'm just starting with the overview and the synopsis and the summaries before we get into the nitty-gritty of how the takeover is going to happen. They do start to talk about church. And one of the things that is just incredible, and I had to linger on the page that I was reading today about this, anything that has to do with diversity and inclusion and equity, out. Anything that has to do with gender role, sexual orientation, out. And in fact, the suggestion has already been made in the plan in this early stage that this is all of that is pornography. And that if anybody talks about any of those subjects, which means racial equity efforts, civil rights, LGBT rights, reproductive health was one of the areas. You can't say that word. Right. So all of that will be considered pornography, and it's not even a suggestion. It's outright said in black and white that the people who allow any document or literature or books or any of that, that if it's librarians and educators, should be jailed, and that this would be considered sexual deviant offense. Okay, so there it is. We're going to now start jailing and prosecuting librarians and teachers for saying something like sexual orientation, gender role, reproductive health.
Well, and that attack is in full force right now. It's fully manifesting the attack on all of those liberties.
Absolutely. And it's very deep into it's couched, and this isn't news because you're seeing this everywhere. The family values philosophy, okay? But what they're really talking about is a man, preferably a white man, but a man is the head of the house who makes the decisions for the family, and those decisions are better for their individual families, regardless of how they are identified and executed, and that family has more rights than community in general. And they talk about transmorphing the word government and eliminating the word government, by the way, and only using community. Okay, and in that community means that American identity cannot be separated from Christian nationalism.
Speechless. I'm speechless. And then,
What can you say to
about,
this? But it's actually,
well, and you're a Jewish person here,
they
too.
absolutely. I'm a Jewish lesbian, and people say, well, why are you so involved in all of this? And I'm thinking, if not me, who's going to do this? So back to the, we're getting deep into this now because we're starting to talk more about the actual document. But so there's fear, and there's the scare that we're all feeling, because we can see this moving out to the field, as it were. And they talk incredible. They use warfare language, battleground language, and eliminating Marxist indoctrination and divisive critical race theory programs. If you teach critical race, that has to be eliminated. That's all about reforming public education, and abolish any newly established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and staff. They want it all gone. And so that means they want to retell and decide how history gets told. So, and we're seeing that, banning the books. And so, but all this battleground and evisceration and all of that very violent language is used in this document. But it's not exactly saying go out and beat people up, but it is talking about how these things are going to be enforced by jail time and elimination, and they use those words, which is basically war language. So at times I feel sad, and I'm also in grief that this is where we are now, right? That happens to me, but I also feel angry, and I also feel that if we ever had the wake up moment, and I don't think that people are unaware of this. I think that the constant barrage of this is what is really voter suppression, right? So when we hear cable TV continually talking about this kind of information, we also have to look at what are the wins that we're having right now. And this goes back to your opening information about the trial. Okay, the very fact, many of us will look at the trial and instead of saying, wow, this thing is actually happening, this is an amazing moment where a person is now being accused of what and being held accountable in a courtroom, okay, and has to listen to jurors read information about how they actually felt about that particular indicted person, right, the defendant. And so that person is required to sit in that courtroom, and the other, many of people that I know will say, wow, why didn't it happen earlier? He's never going to go to jail, blah, 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 blah. But instead, do we look at the pile of crap, or do we look at the pile of, you know, sunshine and hope? I mean, we have to start to look at which battles we're actually winning. Okay, and I think it's time that we look at this as the war that it really is. I mean, they call it culture wars, but it is not culture wars. It is really democracy versus dictatorship. And I don't think that's a culture war at all. I think what we're doing here is as you suggested also, it's about power. It's not even about economics. It is about economics because, again, since Reagan, all of the trickle down theory of the economy policies, but it is also power because there's never enough. It's an addiction to power, right? I think we can look at that because the more they have, the more they need. And so there is it's a bottomless need that is never satisfied, no matter how much. I mean, how much money do you really need? The money is only supportive at this point in time for many of the people involved, is only supports the power need. It's not really so much about money because 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, you know, the difference in that person's lifestyle is not going to be very different at that kind of income, but it does promote the power. And that's really, I think, the addiction to power that we're talking about here.
Well, you know, one of the things that I find also, well, it's sad, it's scary, is that the people that want the power are using Christian nationalism to get it. And they literally hold none of the values that authentic Christians hold. So you have people who are weaponizing Christianity, and then you have people who are legitimately involved in their Christian faith, who do follow the tenets of Jesus as he's depicted in their faith, and abhor what's going on with the takeover of their faith by these people in pursuit of power.
Well, I think I see that as yes and no. Okay. Is it really the subversion of the values that are found in the documents that we call the Bible or the Torah or any of the religious documents? I mean, there's an awful lot of smiting and smoting that goes on in the Bible, you know. So the elimination of anyone who thinks differently than you, there's a lot of conquering, whether it's through a belief system or it's through actual murder or it's actual military. I mean, it's in there. I think that what we do when we call ourselves religious is, do we decide that inclusion informs our values or not, right? So the values that some Christians, some Jews, some Muslims, some of us decide that these values are humanitarian versus your redemption is through this pathway and only this pathway becomes the issue. So fundamentalism means you must do exactly what I tell you with the vision of someone making the decisions for you. I think in the, say Jewish faith, but I have to broaden it to Jewish culture. You don't really have to believe in God to be Jewish. It's, and I don't believe in God, and I'm very Jewish. So how does that work, you might ask? And that might be another show altogether. But I think that we have to look at the intrinsic values are those values that we choose for ourselves and are not necessarily dictated by our faith.
Hey.
Sort of a take what you like and leave the rest kind of an idea.
Well, we have a lot more to talk about. For people that have just tuned in, my guest today is Joy Silver, and we're talking about what truly is a blueprint for authoritarianism, Project 2025. And it is actually, it has another name, as Joy has explained, by the people who created it. Scary stuff. There are some things we can do about it, and that's what we're learning here today. And here is one of the things we can do about it. This particular shirt is the crux of the Hopeful Sexual campaign, and it is designed to inspire authentic human connection while simultaneously combating sexuality-based shame and stigma. And the really cool thing is, if you go to hopefulsexual.com, it takes you to an Amazon store where this shirt is available in all sorts of styles, sizes, and colors. And I use the revenue to fund PromoHomo.TV. So check it out. I think almost everyone is a hopeful sexual, don't you? So before I bring Joy back on, I ran our last interview through an AI filter that's offered by StreamYard. And this is the 29-second soundbite that the AI filter pulled out from that conversation.
But does that make him more dangerous? And I think that's why we're going to see uglier responses. I mean, can it get uglier? It can always get uglier. It's amazing. Just when you think you've had the bottom of horribleness, there's always some other thing that can be said that seems even more horrible. But let's
well, you know, he has mainstreamed ugliness in our culture.
He has given it permission. You know, it has given it permission. But
So, Joy, that was what the AI decided it wanted to pull out of our entire hour-long conversation.
I like it, actually.
Yes.
It was really good. And I love your piece where you identified all of the issues that are the crux of the matter, as it were. I think you did a good job at putting that piece. Yeah, it was really good because, I mean, essentially, and before I talk about the 4 pillars, first of all, give me an idea of how much time. Are we good on time?
25 minutes.
25 minutes. Okay, good. Okay, so before we get to the 4 pillars, which I want to talk about this week, that are identified for this plan, this 2025 plan. I want to go a little bit back to the historical reference of these values that we're sharing about today for the mandate for leadership. And that's the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, the 700-page document. That's the piece that I'm involved in reading right now. But to roll back to what happened post-Civil War. And then you had Reconstruction. And then when Andrew Johnson became president, he pulled out the government support for the new laws that were allowing for the support of freedom of those people who had been enslaved, and he put back into government people who had really were part of the insurrection. Okay, so that process is what brought people of the values of the pre-Civil War back into government. Okay, so right after that, this is when the Industrial Revolution was at its height, and the railroads were happening, and all of that. And the time period, there are two identifiers for that time period. One is the Gilded Age, which I think there's an HBO special showing you the Gilded Age, and that's when, and the robber barons, right? Those are two identifiers for the time period. And what are they? This is before child labor laws, unionization. Basically, they took all of the available employees and staff, and they moved them into the factories and the working for the capitalists, right? The people who now had all of the money and the authority, and were able to use government to support their power, basically. But it was totally unregulated. And so you had children working all night and no breaks, and all of the things that happened. And early, and this is before women had the vote, right? So this was that moment in time. That power, that unfettered, non-regulated capitalism, this is where these people, and I say the people who put together the 80 organizations plus who put together this Project 2025 plan, want to go back. And they talk about going back. Now, they don't date it back to the time period I'm talking about, but it is obvious to anybody who knows even that much about history that that's really where they want to go. Total deregulation, where there's no government to protect workers, where there's no government to protect and include minorities, all of that. So what they dial back to is Reagan. And from their point of view, Reagan was their entree into deregulation, which would bring them back to that time period. So he was their guy. And Reagan didn't really have any policy. I mean, this was not his thing, right? He was a communicator, but he was only communicating what? And that's when the Heritage Foundation came in and they made their first mandate for leadership and brought on board and worked with Reagan to push their agenda forward. And that was their time period for that. And given what happened to Nixon, okay, they did not want to see their leader end up like Nixon again. So they wanted to create a plan for Reagan so that he would not encounter or have to deal with what Nixon had to deal with. And at this point in time, some of Nixon's policies, and it's been said by others, I would even see Nixon as too progressive, probably. But it's really important to know that the dialing back, and some people would say their preference over the Gilded Age would even be pre-Civil War, where you can have enslaved people. But essentially, if workers have no rights and they're paid very minimally and have no protection, they are enslaved, right? So it kind of broadened the ability to enslave more people into the system that fed their power. So Others may see it differently, and of course, I'm not suggesting that it's equal, but it is indeed another form of enslavement that they were going forward. And so FDR and the policies of protection and helping people, particularly because we had the Great Depression and people were out on the streets. So the policies that FDR moved forward in the time of crisis were seen positively because people were in this massive suffering across the country like they had never seen before. And I think during a crisis like that, and the kind of crisis that we're facing now, people begin to realize, all parties, people from all points of view, realize that it's not helpful if they're not included in the decision making. And I think that is also a hopeful moment in time. When I see what happened with the passing of the Ukraine bill, how it took Democrats and Republicans, non-MAGA Republicans, to move that forward. Again, this for me is energy towards the protection of democracy or the saving of democracy, right? And you're right, I use the word protect because at this point in time, we can still vote.
Well, if
So from
someone's
my point of view,
drowning, if someone is flailing in the ocean, uh,
that's a saving moment.
uh, well, if someone's flailing in the ocean, they're still alive. They're not dead. They might even know
Well,
how to
a good
swim, but
point.
they're still flailing in the ocean.
Yes, and we certainly can see that on its way to happening. That's for sure. Particularly since, and now we'll get back into Project 2025 for a second, particularly because this plan in its execution stage specifically said that all of these teams will be organized with these policies and people in place to execute it, okay? On day one. What is day one? And they specifically say, as soon as the president, the conservative president, and this is never about Trump, by the way, because if Trump does not win, this will remain for any conservative president that might win after this. If this is not their guy and he doesn't make it, this does not stop them from pushing their agenda forward because the plan is there. So the moment in time when this is ignited, shall we say, is when that person says, "So help me God." And it actually says, when the president is sworn in and says, "So help me God," that's when the plan starts. So that's how organized they are. So going back to what does the plan say, let's talk a little bit about, well, they want to defund the Department of Justice, dismantle the FBI, break up the Department of Homeland Security, eliminate the Department of Education and Commerce, right? And the president would have complete power over quasi-independent agencies like the FCC, and it makes the enforcement for television and internet, right? Which are the bane of that guy's existence, right? And they want to slash down the bureaucracy, and it doesn't do it just for that person who's president, but for a long time to come. And that White House maintains the total control of that. The deregulation of targeted industries, privatize all government functions. So Social Security, we heard George Bush talk about this incessantly. It will make sure that the American corporations make more money at the expense of the American workers, the middle class, and everyone except that 1%. So that consolidation of power is throughout the paper. So let me just identify those four pillars in the remaining time that we have, unless there are some questions that you
No,
see, Nicholas. No?
let's get into those four pillars. But one of the things that's clear to me as you and I continue to have this conversation in the media is that um, between now and the election is that there's always more to explain, to educate the viewers about what they're really trying to do. So your fear of the fact that people don't know that is alleviated, and that people are activated. And then that will be juxtaposed with the most current headlines of the day, which are influencing the whole process. So, but yes, let's spend the next 15 minutes diving into those four pillars.
Yeah. And I think that the ability to communicate it, and one of the slides that you had in the interim talked about facts versus fiction, or facts versus lies. And I talked about this in I think the previous show. We must make that contrast obvious. There can't be any la-di-da diplomatic language about this. We need to be precise about what it is and how we fight it, and how we protect that or save that democracy. And it has to be really clear with any candidate who's running to represent people, any candidate. And so there's a slight distaste for negative campaigning, but I think we are way past that, because unless you think this is a positive thing about a takeover to dictatorship, we're way past diplomacy at this point in time, because they're not diplomatic at all in their document. They're very obvious. And in a way, again, there's the hopeful piece of this. The plan is right there for anybody to read. You don't have to guess what they're thinking and what they want to do. They're telling us exactly. And in a way, that lets us prepare for this. So I'm good with that.
So let's get into the Cliff Notes version of those four pillars.
Okay. So pillar number one. The pillar, and I'm going to look at my notes because it's complex. The pillar number one is, this is the mandate paper itself, right? So the mandate for leadership, the document, the consensus view of all of those agencies and individuals that come together to write the policy of how the major federal agencies have to be governed, and where the disagreements are with the way things are, and how those differences, the president, the conservative president, can see the differences and make and help them choose the path. So mandate one is the actual paper, the document that meets it out. Pillar number two, and again, that's the 900-page document that we're talking about. Pillar number two, and this is really tactically interesting and large from my point of view, because it's the tool, it is the weapon of the mandate. It's a personnel database. Okay, so pillar number two, and that personnel database is how they collect members of the people who are going to execute the plan. Okay, it's not going to be the database necessarily of you and I or the opposition, although yes, there is that part where there's a punishment for disagreement. Okay, that's what the prison time is for teachers and librarians. That's already been identified early in the game in this document. But it's really about how their coalition members can review the document and get on board with being part of what I call their army. Is it the militia? Maybe part of that, but it's also those who are going to lead or be staff members or be part of the people who execute the vision of the conservative promise. So they're already in the process of creating that personnel database. So if they need to hire someone, they know who they're going to hire. If they need a staffer at a certain level, that personnel database, they already know. Now, a lot of this, why they're looking at this database, is because when that guy was elected, which even they didn't think he was going to get elected, okay? But when he got elected, there was disarray. They were not ready to place people within the administration. And a lot of the time, even though a lot of damage was done, they still didn't know who it was to put in certain positions, which is why we saw that guy dismiss a lot of people along the way and bring in other people. They weren't ready for that takeover, but they're never going to be in that position again, because pillar number 2 is that personnel database that they're already involved in building. And then on the pillar number 3, this is called, sorry, I'm laughing. It's just, it's surreal, you know. I mean, you would think you were watching a film if it wasn't for real, right?
The Handmaid's Tale.
The presidential administration, yeah, the Handmaid's Tale, or Armageddon movies, which are all over which are all over the film
End of
industry right
days.
now. The presidential, right? The Presidential Administration Academy. Okay, and what is that? It is an online educational system taught by the experts from their coalition. So when someone becomes elected or becomes a member of potential appointment or hire, they are taught how to think. So it's leadership training, education. I call it indoctrination. That person who has that potential now is now going to be brought into the fold as to how it is they're going to think about things, and they're going to be given the information or disinformation or the set of facts that are approved by that administration, right? And so they'll host in-person seminars and set the bar for what is expected of senior leadership. So they're not going to be having this turnover that we saw from that last administration. They are going to be sure that when they identify that leader is part of the thinking and has already accepted the tenets of this mandate for leadership. So that's pillar number 3. And then finally, in pillar number 4, they call it the playbook. Okay, and that is, they're currently drafting transition plans, and this is where it actually says forming agency teams and drafting the plans to move out upon the president's utterance of "so help me God." And that playbook team, that is the formation for the immediate execution of all of the things that we're talking about right now. So these 4 pillars, this is how they're moving out into the war or the battlefield. I mean, I see the battlefields right now all over. And one of the greatest battlefields is the takeover and the fights that are happening in the Board of Education and in the boards that govern that what's happening in the school boards, because that's the level that we're seeing. And they're testing right now what works, what doesn't work. And for too long, we've ceded the ground to this kind of behavior. And to be able to stand up now and be sure that no one is above the law, that's why what we're seeing about what's happening to Trump at that federal level is critical, because this is what everyone is following straight down to water board elections, school board elections. It's all the same. It's all of a mind and of a testing program. If we see convictions, it affects what happens down ballot, as it were. It means if people go into flagrant disregard of the law, which is what we're seeing, especially in Marietta, where even though the law of California said you cannot force schools to out their transgender children, the law says you cannot do that in California. They're going ahead and doing it anyway. And that's what's on our table right now, right here in Riverside County. So those are the 4 pillars. And we can see that that trained personnel that they're working with right now, the effect is certainly not and only for now. You know, why did they tie themselves to that guy? Why would they tie themselves to somebody like Trump in order to make this happen? And insofar, is it about Trump? Can Trump dismantle and make the pathway for this plan to move forward? Can he put government in such disarray and help consolidate power? Yes, that's what he's on board to do. Now, at some point, they're probably realize that they have no control over him. But for now, with this plan and them training people to move forward, they will have their bench strength for their candidacy for very critical positions within the government. And that would be Heritage Foundation, Koch brothers, and dark money networks, which is all the 1%, which is what it's really about.
Wow. So
So,
for those people who are watching live, this is your final call to be able to make a comment about what you've just watched. Joy's going to be appearing regularly on this show, not every week, but as often as she can between now and November. And if you want to know when that happens, go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, and make sure that you go into settings and turn on notifications, or else you could have subscribed and you still will not be notified. And you can follow Joy on X at JoySilver4CA and on Instagram at joy.silver.7. So, in the last 2 minutes, what would you like to leave us with today?
so I want to leave us with this. First of all, we cannot govern if we do not win. And we cannot win if we do not vote. And so that becomes the most critical piece of what we still have in our arsenal, and also to take hope and inspiration for the things and the gains that we are making. It's important to take the wins and to know when we're actually moving forward and not look at, yeah, but. Can't look at the yeah, but. We have to take the battles that we win and move forward to win more. And we will share our light with one another because we have that job to do. And we have to be that heat that forges the strength of steel, because it's only together that we make this world a better place. So, Nicholas, I so appreciate your giving me this time to talk about these things that are on my mind and on most of the people's minds that I know. Indeed, it is freedom versus fascism, democracy over dictatorship.
Well, it's an honor to be with you on the front lines of this fight, and I'm glad that the people of Ukraine will now have support on their front lines against Russia to bring it into a timely news topic. And I'm delighted, Joy, that you've accepted my open invitation to come back as often as you want. And I know my viewers are too. So thanks again, Joy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everything that you do, Nicholas, to keep everybody informed.
It's my pleasure. And everyone at home, thank you for watching. And I will see you next time. Not necessarily every week, but almost every week. See you soon.
Thanks.
In a safe place, I got